The Born to Win podcast highlights individuals excelling at high levels in their purpose and calling. This podcast is for anyone looking to get ahead in life and willing to take action and reach their full potential. Using C.H.A.M.P.S male mentoring model of the 3 E's, education, empowerment, and exposure, it means you too are born to win.
I'm born to win. Live. The Jets from Chicago be screaming all that. You are now tuned in to the Born to Win podcast. Champion. You are tuning in to the Born to Win podcast show with Vondale Singleton.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Born to Win podcast. I am Vondale Singleton, and I'm super excited about our next special guest from the south side of Chicago. During the pandemic, we wanted to pivot. And again, I've said this on every episode. We have to have different perspectives to bring us knowledge and wisdom. I'm excited to introduce to some and to reintroduce to others Arne Duncan. That's right, you heard me. I said Arne Duncan.
Hi, I'm Arne Duncan, the Secretary of Education. Education's been a lifelong passion and calling for me. My mother started an inner city tutoring program before I was born. Along with my sister and brother, I grew up as a part of her program, and it was just an absolutely formative experience for me. And so many of the lessons I learned as a young child being a part of her program has really shaped my educational philosophy. So after I went to college, I played professional basketball in Australia for 4 years. Came back to Chicago to run an education nonprofit called the Ariel Foundation. I ran an I Have a Dream program where for 6 years I worked with a group of students and their families to help those students prepare to go to college. I worked with them from 6th grade through 12th grade. During that time, I started a small public school from the outside called Ariel Community Academy. It's a very high-performing neighborhood school still today in Chicago. And then 10 years ago, I joined the Chicago Public Schools, and for the past 7.5 years, I was the CEO of the Chicago Public Schools. Obviously, I care so deeply about and to work for the President. President Obama is just an extraordinary visionary around education. I've been lucky to work with him over the years and to call him a friend, and I think with his leadership, we have a chance to do something very, very special.
But I've always followed him, and part of that had to do with my passion in becoming an educator. Straight out of college, going into the classroom, and I would hear his name, and I'm a C.P.S product. And when he was the CEO of Chicago Public Schools, I believe in 2001, around that time, he definitely was on the front lines in making sure that his voice was heard and was heard very loud. And then in, I believe, 2009, when President Obama came into office, of course, President O took him away from Chicago Public Schools, and he served as a Secretary of Education for the United States Department of Education. And I don't know if you guys have seen him play basketball, but I have several times in person on TV, and he's an amazing basketball player. And we're going to talk a little bit about just kind of that journey. But I want to introduce the one and only. Give it up for Arne Duncan. Welcome to the Born to Win podcast. We're glad that you're here. How you feeling today?
Thanks for having me. I'm not used to those kinds of introductions. Well, I appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So you doing well? How's everybody doing?
Yeah, we'll always be real. And my family's good. My family's safe. We're laying low, but it's a really hard time. And Chicago, nationally, around the planet, and people say once in a generation. I think it's once in a century. And I hate that we're going through this. I hate what it's doing, to our communities on the south and west sides. We're all experiencing loss, taking some real L's here, and we just have to keep working together, helping each other. And I hate that we have. I'm always, people agree or disagree. The lack of leadership coming from DC now is devastating. It just leads to more people dying, and that for me, it's breaking my heart. So we're all trying to step up and do lots of things, step into that leadership void. But this was going to be tough. It does not have to be, should not be this tough, should not be this hard. And we need good leaders. So it's a complicated, complex time, and we just got to get through it together.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It is a complicated time. And as I've been expressing, this is an opportunity too, where I believe those of us who have the opportunity to advance ourselves, to become the version 2.0 of ourselves, because the world as we know it, when we go back into society, will not be the same. And so we have to learn now, what are the changes, where are the gaps that we have so that we can adapt and add value, because there are a lot of people hurting. And I don't know if you heard, Brother Arne, but they mentioned that throughout this pandemic, we can expect a mental health crisis leaving here. And so we have to be ready to be on the ground to figure out how do we become our brother's keeper and cover our communities as well.
That's exactly right. And we, the work I'm doing now, sort of this violence reduction work with Chicago CRED on the South and West sides, one of the most important parts is we have an amazing clinical team that's working with guys who have, we talk about post-traumatic stress disorder. It's not post, it's present, it's current, it's every day where our young men are dealing with. And now this is just layered on top of that. Yes. And so taking care of each other, taking care of our staffs, taking care of the community, people who are really hurting, mental health, physical health, emotional health. We're doing a ton of food distribution now. There are a lot of people that were doing okay that are recently really hungry, really food insecure. And that's a whole different level of stress. So we're all having to figure out new ways to try and serve, as you said, just look out for each other, be our brother's keeper.
Yeah. So, for those of you who don't understand, like, the importance of what Arne mentioned with Chicago CRED and the great work that they've done, I've had the privilege to work with Billy Moore quite a bit, and some of the other brothers, Tony Woods and various other guys who are really, really on the ground, really providing support for young men who made mistakes throughout their lives, just like all of us, right? And they find themselves needing that extra support and love. And I've admired from a distance the great work that you're doing. And then also, how you've been vocal about getting folks to look at the priorities of where we provide our resources and fight for and advocate for other organizations just like C.H.A.M.P.S and others to get more resources to help our young men navigate, because it's very, very difficult, especially when you get into certain situations where you have to pay your debts to society, whether it be incarceration or you lose your job or, something happens where it puts you on a hard time. And again, I love the great work that you guys do with Chicago CRED. Can you talk a little bit more about how Chicago CRED got started?
Yeah, sure. And I guess some of this stuff comes from, honestly, places of pain. And you talked about, basketball. We can get into that, but, grew up playing on the South and West sides and, 13, 14, 15 years old, and had, some guys that sort of would, frankly, protect me and sort of give me safe passage in and out of neighborhoods, and started to lose some of those guys to gun violence when I was a teen. And it's sort of hard to talk about, and probably, shapes you and honestly scars you in some way, in some pretty tough ways. And fast forward to our time at C.H.A.M.P.S, and, happy to talk about successes, happy to talk about things that got better. I know how hard your wife is working and others, and, love to go into that. But on my watch, during my 7.5 years in Chicago public schools, on average, we had a student killed every 2 weeks due to gun violence. This is just a devastating level of loss. And, all the things that, you need to, academic achievement and budgets and operations and labor management, all that stuff, that's, important. And I don't want to say that's easy, but all that stuff was way, way easier than going to those funerals and going to a classroom where there was an empty desk and going to meet families 99% of the time after they had just lost their, young son or daughter. And my wife and I had 2 young kids at the time, and just couldn't imagine. And just got harder and harder. And in hindsight, very naively, when we left to go to DC in 2009, actually thought things couldn't get any worse in Chicago. I thought we were at rock bottom. And then for a whole host of reasons, things got a lot worse in the 7 years we were in DC. So coming back, Chicago was giving me everything, educationally, athletically, socially, culturally, whatever. For me, coming home and not trying to deal with this crisis, I just couldn't sort of live with myself. And I often say that we're motivated by our successes, but we're also haunted by our failures. And I know that we as adults, we as leaders, we fail to keep our kids safe. and it's not right and it's not fair. And they're growing up with a level of fear and trauma that's just totally unacceptable. So it was interesting. I've done 10 years at C.H.A.M.P.S and 7 years at DC, so 17 years straight in government. That's a long time. And coming back as a private citizen, I'm trying to think, how do you make a contribution? And I'm pretty radical. I would love to get rid of all the guns or as many guns as possible. We have way too many guns. And people talk about gun laws. I always say Chicago has some really strict gun laws, but we're right next to Indiana. The guns pour into our neighborhoods from 30 minutes, south of us. And we're trying to help police and community rebuild trust. But the truth is that I always say they're amazing individual police officers, and we work with many of them. But structurally, trust between the police and the community is broken, so very few crimes get solved. And so you have way too many guns, and you have no one feeling safe, so then everyone's carrying a gun to protect themselves. So the question is, what can you do as a private citizen? The only thing I could think to do is to give guys a reason to put down the guns and give them a sense of hope. And so I spent a lot of time going into Cook County Jail, talking to guys there, talking to guys on the street, and just trying to listen and hear. And what this work is it's the hardest thing I've ever done. It's sometimes honestly the most heartbreaking, and but also the most inspiring. And learning so many lessons. But the biggest thing, and we can get into Billy more specifically, but the biggest thing I'm learning is not to judge. And guys made some choices. I don't want to call them bad choices. They made choices at 12 or 13 or 14 that they felt they had to make. One guy told me, I just got tired of hearing my mother cry at night, and I had to go do something. And another guy said, he said, Arne, I grew up in a household full of guns. I wish we would have had some toys. And grew up in a household full of guns, and he became a shooter. And so just working with these young men who are most likely to shoot and be shot, and we all know that the profile, that's the same guy. Doing a whole host of things, educational piece. We've had over 100 guys get high school diplomas. We have guys starting college now. Again, the clinical piece, just helping on the trauma is so important. We have amazing life coaches, people like Billy Moore. We do hard and soft skills. We sort of help guys transition from the streets to the legal economy. And what they always say is these men, I don't see them as the problem. I see them as the solution. We have to walk with them. We have to learn from them and continue to grow. And we started 3 years ago in 2016 when things were really at its worst point in terms of violence. And we've had 3 years of double-digit reductions in shootings and homicides. So we're really proud of that progress, really pleased. So as you know, we have a heck of a long way to go. And the start of this year hasn't been great. The start of this year, we're actually up.
Yep.
So we're doubling down on some things and really working. We have amazing street outreach workers and great partners doing that. So we're putting a lot more boots on the ground now, even during this time. But I just think these men have to lead our city to a safer place. And I just want to give our kids back their childhood. Just give them a chance to play and go to the park and go to this corner store. And I don't think it's asking too much. So we got a lot of hard work ahead of us.
Absolutely. Now, going back into your childhood with growing up on the south side of Chicago, can you just let everybody know what that was like for you? And then I want to get into some basketball. We got to talk basketball for sure. It's hard to separate south side of Chicago because it was like in the late 70s, early 80s. And I grew up in a Bronzeville community. It was like either you played basketball or you carried a gun. You played basketball or you gangbanged. You went skating or you ran the street. It was like one or the other. It was hard to live a life where you were in between. You had to make a decision. And if you did make a decision, that decision was going to be made for you. So what was it like for you growing up on the south side of Chicago? Can you tell us a little bit about your story?
Yeah, as a kid, you don't sort of realize it's just your life. It's just sort of normal. You don't realize it's maybe a little bit different than most, and not better or worse, just different. And I live in Hyde Park. I live 2 blocks from where I grew up. It's so good to be back home. And my dad was a professor at the University of Chicago, so that influence was strong. And I was born in 64, and my sister's born in 67. My brother in 70. And in 1961, my mother started a tutoring program at 46 in Greenwood. And it's less than 2 miles from our house. We used to walk there some days. We grew up at 56th Street. This was on 46th Street. But in those days, 47th Street was the invisible barrier between integrated middle class Hyde Park and all black, all poor North Kentwood, Oakland. So we just grew up going to her program, all our lives. We was going to after school program way before I went to real school. And it just had this unbelievably formative impact on my sister and brother and I. And my mother did that work for 52 years until her health gave out. Unfortunately, she has Alzheimer's now. And my sister and brother and I have all tried to follow in her footsteps in different ways. And just what I saw is that, my friends during the school day versus my friends in the afternoon. My friends in the afternoon were as smart, as talented, as committed, as resilient as my friends during the school day, but just didn't have the same opportunities, in terms of safety, in terms of education, in terms of, protection from violence, in terms of, food. And my mother was, trying to stand in that gap and, unbelievable stories. But it just the fundamental unfairness there. And her whole philosophy was, 10-year-olds taught 5-year-olds and 15-year-olds taught 10-year-olds. So we all grew up, teaching and being taught. And I got a million stories. I'll just tell you one. The young man that taught my group of young guys coming up, Michael Clark Duncan was actually in our group, who you guys have probably heard of, and was a guy named Kerry Holly. And Kerry Holly was like a big brother to us. He probably taught us for 6 or 8 years. He went to Kenwood, went to DePaul, went to law school. So he stayed with us. We weren't an easy group. And I was writing my book when I was done. I went back to interview him. And I thought I knew everything about him. And he said, "Have I ever told you my birth story?" I said, "No, I don't think you have." And I knew he was raised by his grandmother. I knew he never met his father. I knew his mother ran the streets. We knew all that. That was, I don't say, that's pretty typical. That wasn't anything different. What he told me was that when he was born, his mother wrapped him in newspaper and threw him in the garbage.
Wow.
And his grandmother took him out of the garbage and raised him. And he went on to work for IBM, has traveled the world, has these international patents. And he literally started his life in a garbage can. And because my mother and others were in his life, he's done these extraordinary things. And I just think about how much talent in all of our communities that starts in a tough spot, or maybe even starts in a garbage can. It says nothing about what they have to contribute to our communities and to the world. And so just trying to, in everything I've done, trying to bring opportunity to places where it's absent, trying to bring hope where it's absent. That's what I learned from my mother. And I always say, I know what's possible, because I've seen, I have so many stories of, by all the stats or all the myths or all the stereotypes, young men and women who shouldn't have been able to do anything, and they've done unbelievable things just because they had a chance. And I always thought, my mother just had a set of kids from sort of 46th, 45th, 43rd. I think about the kids, they're on 39th, they're 31st, or where you lived, and maybe didn't have those opportunities. And that's my motivation. That's always been my motivation.
Yeah, and I think that motivation, as you mentioned a little bit earlier, it's like the greatest work that we do, and the greatest satisfaction of being fulfilled when we hear the positive stories, but it's also the most heart-aching things that we have to go when we have to go to the funerals, right? So yeah, it's this balance of both. Yeah.
It's just, for me, it's just, I try and, it's just real. And I try not to get too high to the high and too low to the low. And you got to be able to handle and deal with both. I'll say that the losses don't get easier. They get honestly harder, and you can't let it break you, but you try, and I also try not to run away from it. I try and feel all that pain and all that sorrow, and then try and use that as motivation to how we get, how do we get smarter? How do we get better? How do we help more? And try and use it as fuel. But it's you can't feel it as somehow you deny it or you get numb to it. That's when things get pretty scary. And so I don't like hurting, but the day I get numb is the day I'm gonna get real worried. I don't want to be in that spot. It's not a healthy or safe place to be.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So I want to talk a little bit about your transition, right? Being the CEO of Chicago Public Schools. And then if you can just add in your relationship with President Obama, because obviously you served in the White House with him. But yeah, talk a little bit about your passion for education and how did you get involved with it, and just your journey from CEO to Secretary of Education.
I'll try and back it up and be pretty quick. So after college, I played professionally overseas in Australia for 4 years, and then came back and started an I Have a Dream program where we started with a group of kids at 6th grade at Shakespeare Elementary School, which was right across the street from where my mother's program was in the church basement. Did that work with my sister for 6 years. And during that time, we actually started our own small public school, Ariel Community Academy. It's now 20 years old, which is crazy. Again, we're all getting older, but it wasn't a good elementary school. And when our kids are from our I Have a Dream class, we're graduating from high school, going on to college, I was sort of thinking about what do I do next? And we thought about, another class of dreamers. There are 40 kids in that class. As Ariel Community Academy grew, it's a small public school. That was going to have 400. And then I thought about the Chicago public schools, and that had 400,000. And just the math of it, from 40 to 400 to 400,000. And I'll be real honest, for most of my life, the public schools were a little bit the enemy, because in the neighborhood where we worked, the schools weren't great. They weren't serving kids well. And my mother and her team always trying to do sort of a 3 o'clock or 8 o'clock at night, what wasn't happening during the school day. As I sort of sat back and thought, I said, it's sort of easy to critique. It's easy to throw stones from the outside. It's a different thing to roll up your sleeves and try and go inside and try and take some of the things I had learned, from my mother, from starting school, and see, could you have impact, not on a block and not on a neighborhood, but at scale, at the city. And so went in and, 2.5 years later, I was 36 years old, was picked to run C.P.S. And that was never my ambition. That was never my dream. That was never the goal. But it was obviously just an extraordinary opportunity. And I love that work. And my goal was to do 10 years as superintendent. It's sort of crazy. If you look across the country, superintendents don't last. It's usually like 2 years, 2.5 years. So when I started, I was obviously youngest. And then 7 years later, I was literally the longest serving big city urban superintendent in the country. And that was crazy to me. You can't have this constant turnover. It's hard to get better. Mm-hmm. But connected the dots, I grew up playing basketball. We can talk about that. And one of the guys I grew up playing with was Craig Robinson. And Craig Robinson was Michelle's older brother. And first time I met Barack, that was Craig's little sister's boyfriend. That's what we knew him as. And we played some together. And over time, he went into the Illinois legislature, and we did some education work together, visited schools together, and then he went to the Illinois Senate. And then it's like once in a lifetime, lightning strikes, and your friend becomes president of the United States. Nobody would have thought that was possible or could happen. And I would say I got a lot of friends I wouldn't move my family for, and I'll say real honestly, I didn't go for the job. I didn't go for the title. I knew his heart. I knew his commitment. I knew what he had been through. Father abandoned him, when he was born, came into his life for like a month when he was 10 or 11 years old, disappeared again. I knew Michelle's family really well, great parents, strong parents, but neither had been to college. She and her brother, Craig, were first-gen college goers. So education just wasn't some issue for them. It was personal. It came from their hearts. And to go and be part of his team. I hated to leave Chicago. I hated not being able to do 10 years. Honestly, had anybody else asked where I didn't have that personal connection and trust and friendship, I honestly would have said no. But the chance to serve in that historic administration and try and make that team better and try and be a good teammate to him, and to try and again take what my mother started with 50 kids to 400 CPS to 52 million children across the country.
Wow. To
try and get those lessons. It was a chance of a lifetime, and I would, it was hard. It was all that. I would do it all again tomorrow. And I traveled to all 50 states and, visited hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of schools. And, I can tell you so many stories, and I probably visited more schools across the country, honestly, probably maybe than anybody during that time. And, I thought I knew poverty. I thought I knew challenge. I thought I knew violence, here, but I'd never been to a Native American reservation before. And you do that, and it's a whole different level. And I try to do a lot of that. I go back every year and speak at tribal graduations. And it really, rural America, Appalachia, families that have had 5 generations working in the coal mines, and now there's no more coal workers, and just seeing the devastation in those communities. So it just you learn amazing things, you learn hard stuff, and struggle is struggle. For me, the struggle largely been in the Black community here, but whether it's Native American, whether it's rural white, spent time on the border of Mexico with obviously Latino population, seeing that it really there are definitely some differences, but the commonalities are so much bigger that cut through race and geography. And just to have that awareness, to have that understanding. For me, I can read stuff, but I need to see it and feel it to really understand it. To have that chance, unbelievable.
What was the thing in all of your experiences, whether being CEO, whether it's starting a school, Ariel, or Shakespeare, or traveling around to every state in America, really doing a deep dive on the conditions of people? What's one of the biggest takeaways for you? Have you been able to really process kind of that whole span of time? And if so, what's some of the biggest takeaways you would share?
Yeah, there's so many lessons and you're still learning. I just say a couple. One, again, despite the obstacles, despite the poverty, despite all that, we just have amazing kids everywhere. And just hearing kids' stories and what they're overcoming and what they're accomplishing, what they're doing to get to school every day and how serious they are, it blows me away. Growing up, I had a roof over my head. I had food every day. I had 2 educated parents. It was a given that I was going to walk to school every day. It was a given that my sister and brother and I would go to college. That's not the norm. That's not typical. And just getting a sense for kids, just remarkable resilience and commitment to improving their lives and getting their education always moves me. And I always say that, great teachers matter. Great educators stepping in, great counselors, great social workers that see things in kids that they can't even see in themselves, that see that talent, that see that ability that, my mother saw something in Kerry Holly that maybe he saw, maybe he wasn't aware of, but she identified him as a leader really early, and the rest is sort of history. And we have teachers and social workers and counselors just doing heroic work every day, and obviously particularly now during this pandemic. And then you're living this. I always say I went to hundreds and hundreds of schools. I've never been to a great school that didn't have a great principal. And your wife's a principal. And leadership matters in education, it matters in government, it matters in politics, it matters in sports, it matters in business. And that literally every great school I went to had a great principal. And they can have different styles and different ways of doing that, but great principals attract talent, they retain that talent, they nurture that talent, they build a learning community. And I got so many examples, but I'll just give you one. I went to Baltimore after the Freddie Gray riots. Yep. And there was an amazing school, Liberty Elementary, that I was looking at the data, the numbers, and they had for years were just doing way, way, way better than quote unquote they should have been given their geography. And they were right there at the heart of that. And kids outperforming not just other kids in Baltimore, but outperforming kids in the suburbs. And I got to go see this, and saw things that you would expect: an amazing principal, remarkably committed teachers and educators. And then saw something I hadn't expected. They had turned the school into a food bank, and they were giving out something like 9,000 pounds of of food a month. Amazing, a staggering amount of food. And that's not in any principal's job description. You don't learn that anywhere. But they had figured out that their community needed food. And I can't prove to you that the fact that they were feeding people were leading to these academic results, but I know there's a line there. And so that kind of leadership, that kind of creativity of just figuring it out. And I go back to my mother. I remember my mother, all the time we just did it was just bring kids home, kids' clothes home and wash them and bring them back the next day. And nobody said anything, but if, you just have to figure things out. You have to problem solve. And where you have, schools as, food distribution centers, where you have schools doing really creative things to take care of kids and build a sense of community and create that safe haven. That's what I saw. That's what I learned. And so I always know what's possible. I know how hard it is. I know all the challenges. but I also know what's possible when you have that kind of remarkable commitment and leadership from the adults in any school.
Yeah. One of the things that, I kind of want to shift gears just a little bit, because I believe, like, every time I see you, you are like the epitome of Chicago, like just your toughness, your wits, just your ability to go into any room and be your authentic self. That's what I see every time, like, I get the vibe from you. But playing basketball, like in some of what I call the golden years of Chicago street ball, back in those days, Terry Cummings and Tim Hardaway and the Benji Wilsons of the world. And people got to really understand, like, the Doc Rivers, like all of these guys that we hear about is so many other people that we haven't heard about. Right. But you were right in the thick of things, Arne, holding your own out there, getting the respect on the street ball side. What's some things that you learned about being a Chicagoan back then? And then just, like, can you tell us some stories that a lot of people probably don't even know about, like, that you experienced firsthand?
Well, a lot of stories, but I'll start. So my mother's program was funny. It was at a church, and we had a gym on the first floor and the classrooms on the second floor. So we always had to do the academic work first, and we were done, we'd go downstairs. And for years, I don't know why, we played kick baseball. So for a lot of years, we played. I don't know if you even know what kick baseball is.
Yes,
that's
sir.
when you kicked the ball and you ran the bases and you kicked it onto the stage. That was a home run. We tried not to break the lights. And we played that for years. And then at some point, I don't even remember when I was like 10 or 11, we realized we were in the gym. We stopped playing kick baseball. We started playing basketball. And so I learned to play. And it just was a funny thing. I grew up, the group of guys that were in my group that Kerry Holly was teaching, most of them were 2 or 3 or 4 years older than me. So I was the youngest and the smallest. And you had people, unfortunately, these 3 have all passed. So, Michael Clark Duncan, who could really play. You had Tadero Ford, who went to Dunbar as a point guard there, came after Ryan Lester. You had Ron Ragland, who, great guard at King. And just every day I grew up playing with them and learning and being the youngest and the smallest and the worst for years and, getting whooped. But it was like a perfect, I was thinking about, had I been the oldest guy playing with younger kids, I probably wouldn't have gotten much better. It just sort of worked out that, we'd go at it. And then we started to bring in, we had our own little team. We'd bring in teams from the outside to play us, and we'd have, battles, guys from King and Dunbar and Phillips, that, those crews. And then when I got to 13, 14, 15, then I started to go out into the neighborhoods and play, and, played in all the tournaments, South and West Sides and, YVI. And that was amazing. And, all those guys. Timmy's a good friend, saw him recently. I remember talking to people saying, like, he's going to be a pro. I mean, you could see stuff. He wasn't a big name coming out of school, and you could see what was possible. Talk about Doc Rivers. I mean, this is crazy. I remember a summer league game where Doc Rivers came off the bench for the other team.
Wow. He came off the bench.
He was like the 6th. They had Reggie Theus and I think Ricky Sobers at that time. I'm out there starting. I was playing with Maurice Cheeks. It's me and Maurice playing. And, I'm like looking at Doc Rivers coming off the bench, and what are we doing? Terry Cummings. I remember my first summer league game. This was we played a lot of years at Chicago State and then De La Salle, but actually started at Triton. And the first summer league game was against, it was like Terry and Isaiah and Mark Aguirre. And we were a bunch of high school kids. And I don't know if we were up, it was either tied or we were up 2 or 4 at half. And one of our guys, I won't say his name, he comes off at halftime and starts talking. And I remember Mark just said, "Young fella, you shouldn't have done that." And we go out, the second half and just get massacred.
Wow.
I never forgot that lesson. You're riding high. But then shifting off, when we keep going on basketball, I'll come back on Benji. But honestly, I always say I went to some great schools, amazing schools, so lucky for that. But for me, the basketball court has always been my best classroom. And I've learned so much more, how to read character, who to trust, who not to trust. I had people who I might not know their name, but I knew I could literally trust my life to them. And I had other people I knew well that I knew I had to be real careful and watch myself. And it's funny. You go to DC and you got this whole security team, this apparatus. I'm like, I don't need it now. I needed it back in the day.
I know that's right.
But you didn't want, you learn how to read character. You learn who to trust and who not to, and you do that to survive. And all the things of, there are times when I'm a bit of star, and the times I'm the last guy on the team. I've been cut from plenty of teams, and as you play outside the streets. You just got to win. You just got to win, and if you don't win, then you're sitting for 2 or 3 hours. And so I was never the fastest. I was never the best athlete, but I learned how to win. And then if you know how to win, you get picked up and you get to stay on the court and you get to play all day. And so those lessons, again, blessed to go to some great schools, but that's home for me. And I, still try and hang out there as much as I can. That's my comfort zone. That's where I'm happiest.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So you mentioned his name, but I definitely want people to understand, guys like Benji Wilson are once in a lifetime opportunities. And, I'm very cordial with Tim Hardaway as well. And like I mentioned earlier, Billy Moore, and everybody that watched the documentary know that story. But what was it like for you to actually be around during that time, to physically see and be around his spirit that a lot of people probably don't understand? Because you can watch a documentary and kind of get a broad idea of a person and the potential that he had. But what do you remember about Benji?
Yeah, this is so deep. This connects directly to what we're doing now. But, I grew up playing with Benji's son. He was a little bit older. And actually, if you look at the documentary, at the very start of it, I'm actually in there. It's a clip of people playing, it's actually YVI. I'm the white guy there. And I was 2 years older, and he was killed in 1984. I graduated in 82. So I actually remember where I was in my dorm room when I got the call that he had been killed. And it was shattering. It was shattering. And a whole bunch of, he wasn't the best basketball player in Chicago. He was the best basketball player in the country. And I was using VR, Magic, or Bird, or whatever. And, 6'8" point guard. I mean, just unbelievable. And we had always felt, you sort of said, you were either a ball player or you were on the streets. We always felt that, we saw some crazy stuff, and neighborhoods could be tough, but the community always gave us unbelievable respect. And no one ever touched me ever. And I'm always so thankful and so grateful. And part of what I do now, trying to give back, is a way of saying thanks to these neighborhoods that I could have been hurt any day, anytime, anywhere, and never, nothing but, respect and care and concern. And so that when Benji got killed, that shattered that perception that somehow we had safe passage, that we could just move and do whatever. And I didn't know Billy Moore, never met him, basically hated him the rest of my life. And I watched the documentary like everybody else. And when they went to the interview with him, honestly, I turned it off. I couldn't even watch. And this is our, life is complicated. There's a lot of gray and it's complex. Fast forward to a couple summers ago, I'm actually doing a peace march out in Auburn Gresham. And one of my guys says, do you know who Billy Moore is? I'm like, yeah, I know who Billy Moore is. He says he's out here and he'd like to meet you. And I didn't quite know what to say. So I said, okay. And we basically walked and talked during that peace march.
Wow.
And hearing his story and hearing his side of what happened and hearing what he went through and how he's devoted his life to giving back, blew me away. And Billy Moore worked with one of our amazing partners, Iman, and now actually is on my team now. And he's one of our best, most valuable employees. And he is, devoted his life to reducing violence. And we always say, experience can be the best teacher, but it doesn't have to be your experience. And he's saving lives every single day. And I've learned so much, from him, and how to, myself, how to forgive, how to, show love, and whatever success we're going to have, it's going to be because of Billy Moore and others like him stepping into that gap and helping out. Very tragically, 2 summers ago, his son was killed. His son was shot 16 times in Foster Park, and I played at Foster Park, most Saturdays for, 25, 30 years now. His son was shot 16 times. That was his only son. And what Billy says, and I believe him, is that if the young man who killed his son came into our program, he would mentor him. He would take him under his wing and work with him, that he can't ask for forgiveness and reconciliation, redemption, if he can't give it. And honestly, that for me, it's just, I get the chills just saying it. It blows me away. And if someone killed my son or daughter, could I have the humanity or the compassion to accept or forgive and bring them in? And sitting here today, I can't honestly say I could do that. So here it's a guy who all my life I hated, who was a villain, who he's actually teaching me. He's instructing me about humanity. And because you're from Chicago, I'll be real here. We basically know who killed his son. Like we know who did it. And there'd be all people reach out to Billy. You don't have to do anything. Let us take care of it for you. Let us handle your business for you. And Billy's like, no, don't do that. And so this is a complicated world. And so that whole story is just, it almost like epitomizes both the heart, is what you said, sort of the heartbreak of Chicago, but also the hope and the redemption and what's possible. And we can't win this fight against violence. We can't create a safer city if we don't have a lot more Billy Moores stepping up and devoting their lives to giving back. And I see every day the impact that he has on our young guys. And we all have different roles to play. And there are things he can say and experiences that he can share that I can't begin to share. We always want to have people around us who have different skills and different experiences, and he can relate to things. And some crazy stuff happened in jail, and they were gonna kill him and have him sign a suicide note, like all kinds of just how just the real reality of what happened there. To hear him talk to the young guys is profound and it's invaluable.
Yeah, and I was there during All-Star Weekend with the Other Sides of the Gun, the documentary watch with Benji's brothers, you, Common, as well as Billy Moore, sat down, and it's one of those experiences where I feel like needs to be mandatory in the educational system on so many different levels. And I really wish like the whole urban America could have sat down in that particular room, just because you don't always hear stories of reconciliation and redemption. You just don't always, especially at a very high scale like that one. And then full circle, guys are able to sit on the same stage. And as you were talking about the Peace March. It's like you were there marching for peace, and yet your personal peace came in a way you probably didn't anticipate, with you meeting Billy Moore, and now you guys are working together. It's just amazing to me how all of the work that we do, whether big or small, is so interconnected, and that's why I really appreciate Billy Moore. I appreciate you for giving Billy Moore the space and the opportunity to, reconcile the relationship with y'all too.
Yeah, so that reconciliation, and Charles Johnson, our friend, worked on that, and it was 34 years to the day that Billy killed Benji. And he had talked to the brothers for a couple of years, and we sat down that night, and it was a 4-hour conversation. And it was, probably, the most moving evening of my life, and it was real and raw, and it almost went haywire a couple of times. But at the end of it, one of Benji's brothers said, you took our older brother from us, and now you have to be our older brother. And it's just, it's on all sides just to see that happen. As you know, so much of the violence here in Chicago is driven by retaliation, everybody trying to get their lick back. And, that's what we're trying to teach our guys is that, I've been to a lot of funerals. I've never seen anybody rise from the dead. I've never seen anybody come up. All I see is a lot of young kids, crying and the heartbreak of family and loved ones. And so if we can teach that reconciliation, we can teach that forgiveness, We tape that, and I would love, like I said, to get it into every high school, to get it, here in Chicago and other places. The lessons are so real and profound and human.
Yeah. So one of the things that I kind of want to close out with, I've been asking all of the guests that if you had the opportunity to have a billboard and had any words on it where millions or billions of people would actually see it, what words would you have and why?
Wow, never been asked that question before. I'm not good at marketing, so I won't have a good one. So I'll cheat a couple words: love, hope, opportunity, our common humanity. And I think, again, this pandemic is just, again, demonstrating to all of us how interconnected we all are, and that none of us are safe, none of us are immune. We all have to take care of each other. So finding that common humanity, and whether it's within the guys here in Chicago, unfortunately, who grow up together and are live 2 blocks from each other and end up trying to shoot each other, whether it's that, whether it's across racial divides, whether it's across geographic divides here in Chicago, across the country, urban versus rural, whatever. But I've also had experience to travel. I've been to Kenya, worked there a little bit. Went to a refugee camp in Jordan for Syrian refugees, again, the Native American experiences. And again, I've been blessed to really not just read about or study, but to feel that common humanity. And I guess that's the message I want people to feel and to understand. And if you understand that, I think it makes you behave and act and treat people in very different ways.
So I wanted to ask about the Michael Jordan and The Last Dance. What are your thoughts on that, and just like the historical context of what Michael Jordan meant to our city? Did you get a chance to meet or play against Michael Jordan, and just kind of what are your overall thoughts on The Last Dance?
Yeah, it's been amazing to watch, and played with him a fair amount. It was a lot of fun coming out of college. Worked out there at the Vondale Center. He was a year or two ahead of us. That was the year Scottie Pippen. We both came out the same year in '87. That's when I was, trying to go pro here, and just, seeing where he was, seeing how good, I knew Pippen was going to be good. I didn't know how good he was going to be. Just seeing that raw talent was unreal. Another story people don't know is that when Michael played baseball and then was starting to come back early on, we were working out sort of every day together, and he was real rusty and a little bit out of shape, and it was fun. For a while we were sort of battling. You just see how quickly he was getting better and better and better. So I was a good practice dummy for a little while, and he just passed me by pretty quickly. But just, did he do everything perfectly? No. Was he human? Absolutely. But just that will to win and what it takes to be that successful. And, like I said, nobody likes to lose. Nobody wants to lose, but very few people are willing to do what it takes to win. And seeing his work ethic behind the scenes, seeing his charisma, his ability to challenge people, to move them. Just again, one of these, how lucky to be just a tiny part of that journey. More than anything, to be a fan and what he did for the city, and it was obviously beyond a gift. And so lucky to be a Chicagoan during that time, and lucky to have a chance to play some with him.
All right, and last question. Give me your top 5 greatest NBA players of all time.
Oh, man, you give me these lists. I'm no good at it. You got to go Kareem. You got to go Magic Bird. You got to go old school. You got to go Bill Russell. And I guess, Michael. So that's quick. LeBron maybe at some point down the road. Kobe would be in that mix, but if you're really going to force me to stick to 5, that'd be my top 5 right now.
Yeah, I think that's my top 5 as well. So you right on it, Arne. Well, thank you so much, sir, for joining the Born to Win podcast. We definitely appreciate your time, and we're going to chop this up and we're going to get it out to our viewing audiences. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for the opportunity. Shoot to get done, and thanks for all your leadership. Really appreciate it. And tell your wife I appreciate what she's doing every day. I know how hard it is.
Absolutely. And same to your family. Stay safe, Arne. Appreciate you.
Thank you for listening to the Born to Win podcast. Would you consider making a donation to C.H.A.M.P.S? We are looking to provide senior class care packages and other essential items like food, hygiene, and toiletries for the families of our C.H.A.M.P.S mentees. You can donate via Cash App at $CHAMPS Mentoring or PayPal at paypal.me/Champs Mentoring. Or you can always visit our webpage, champsmentoring.com, and click on the donate button. Thank you. Champs, all in, champs, all in, champs, all in. Every setback is a setup for greatness. Every failure is a ladder towards greatness. Every goal is applied towards my greatness. Every life experience enhances my greatness. Every task perfects my greatness. The divine guides my greatness. I am greatness in the making. Champs, all in.